Good morning, everyone. I'm Joanne Duncan, and I'm the president of the Membership and Business Operations Division at Bio. I want to welcome you this morning. I'm here to introduce the session and introduce our moderator, who will then introduce the panel. You're here this morning for the super session called Dealmaking in the Headwinds: How will market and political pressures impact biopharma deals in this year, 2016? I'd like to say a special thank you to our sponsor of this session, a long-term sponsor, inVentiv Health Consulting. Thank you for your continued sponsorship for this session. Before we get started, I'll introduce Shigato Das, a co-worker here at Bio. He is the Director of Partnering, leading the team with over 25 plus resources, who support our partnering system here at Bio this year and in prior years. Additionally, Shigato heads our partnering and strategy and innovation section at Bio. A lot of great ideas coming out of Shigato and his team. He advances our partnering products. Prior to working at Bio, Shigato was a senior consultant at CSC Life Sciences, consulted with J&J, Merck, GSK, and many others. So we're pleased to have Shigato. So please join me in welcoming him and our panelists this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Well, I'll keep it short and sweet so we can get to the exciting meat of this presentation. As Joanne so kindly introduced, my name is Shigato Das, Director of Partnering at Bio. When I meet most of you, you say, hey, you're that guy that sends me emails. So that's true. I am that guy. But more importantly, I run the partnering here, and I'd like to give you a real quick overview of what we've achieved. For those of you who are in partnering, you have had over 35,000 meetings. That's up about 25% from previous years, where it was about 29,000. And many times we're at over 1,100 meetings per hour. So those of you who live in the States and go by miles per hour, now meetings per hour is your new cool term if you want to be cool at the clubs when you go out. So all Bio conferences that we've had as of late, Bio CEO and Investor, Bio Investor Forum, have really seen incredible jumps in partnering activity, up 25 to 60%. Why is this happening? Well, my guess is as good as yours, but you're doing something right, because it's more networking is happening, more partnering is happening, and we anecdotally hear that for every in-licenser who's pitching to, every biotech that's pitching to an in-licenser, for every 100 to 150 pitches, one goes the distance to a term sheet. And with 35,000 meetings, that makes Bio the most effective corporate business development forum in the world in any industry. It also makes Bio one of the most effective conferences when it comes to increasing your fitness level. And that happens because some of you have one meeting in West and one meeting in South back to back, and that's very exciting to navigate that course, especially those of you who are wearing heels. So thank you for that. And if I could have you all suspend disbelief for just one moment, it may be possible, it may just be slightly possible that according to our statistics, the typical person who had 15, 20 partnering meetings, of their back-to-back meetings, only 15% or less involved a transfer of 7 to 8 minutes. So over the course of 3.5 days, this may not be exactly how you remember it, but according to our stats, you only had 2 meetings on average that were back-to-back, where you had to make a very brisk walk to get to the next meeting. And we also saw a cancellation rate at this Bio lower than the cancellation rates of meetings at previous Bios. So if you are a partnering delegate, please keep an eye out on your email for some upcoming analyses we'll send out of the meetings at Bio. For example, the rate of acceptances per therapeutic area and other exciting stuff. And remember that Bio is just the start. Now you have to go back and follow up on all those meetings. And fortunately, the new partnering system is integrated with a business development management system that you can use year-round for free to manage all those follow-ups and not have to do a ton of data entry after you get back to the home office. So please take advantage of that. So I look forward to seeing all of you at Bio 2017 in lovely San Diego. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Neil Patel from inVentiv Health. Neil?
Thank you, Chicago. Hi, my name is Neil Patel. I'm a managing director with inVentiv Health Consulting based here in San Francisco. We work with companies in portfolio strategy, business development, licensing, advisory work, as well as commercialization strategy. I'm very excited about moderating this panel. In a minute, we'll get to that. But what I want to do is set the stage with respect to some data that we pull together every year through our Dealmakers Intentions study. And hopefully it'll serve as a catalyst to the discussion. We're hoping for an engaging discussion. We'll start with a brief introduction by each of the panelists, a little Q&A, and we welcome questions from the audience. Maybe after the first question or two, if people want to gather to the mics, we can start fielding questions from the audience. So the Dealmakers Intentions study, it's a forward-looking study. It surveys pharmaceutical executives who are responsible for licensing and acquisitions, and gauges the market with respect to where they anticipate deal-making activity to occur. And a few things of note coming out of this year's study. It shouldn't be any surprise that 2015 was a record-breaking year. And it's anticipated that 2016 may return to more historical norms. Still a very robust year if you look at Q1, but it's anticipated to return to more historical averages. In many respects, it still is a seller's market, although many of you may not feel that. Companies do have increasing options available to them through the financing environment, as well as through alternative deals from large companies. And in this hyper-competitive market, buyers must be particularly skillful in making sure that they don't overpay for some assets that are out there given the demand. So before we get to the study itself, a little bit of context setting. As I said, 2015 was no surprise. It's been widely documented as a record-breaking year in terms of deal making when you look at financing, M&A, and partnering. It may be a surprise as to the magnitude of how large that is when you look at it over the last 6-year period, and 2009 being the last sort of peak. And that peak was driven by a surge of mega mergers. And if you just to take M&A in 2015 out, it would still be the largest year on record versus the previous years. Looking at Q1 2016 and just simply doing the math and multiplying by 4, it looks like it's going to be still a pretty robust year. But the interesting thing to note, right after Q1 2016, there were a wave of fairly large deals, $5 billion plus deals that are going to likely move the numbers further north. If you peel back and look at the data and lay a level deeper, a couple interesting trends are observed. So if you look at partnering and M&A, the percentage of partnering and M&A attributed to large cap bio, so greater than 50 billion, has decreased over time. In 2015, it actually hit an all-time low of just 30% of total deal value attributed to the large biotech, for the large biopharma companies. The other interesting trend here is the volume of financing going to small cap, less than 1 billion, and private companies at hitting an all-time high of 2015 at $25 billion. So those two trends, it's indicative of sellers having a bit more options available. Now, Q1 2016, the trends seem to be carrying forward. It'll be interesting to see the second half of 2016 because some of it you would argue are deals that were planted in 2015 and it may be a carryover, and it'll be interesting to see how the balance of the year carries forward, and we'll want to talk about that with the panelists. We surveyed the executives responsible for licensing and M&A and asked them about factors affecting deal making. An interesting thing of note that the factors that they listed as being most relevant are those associated with buyers, so where there's a buyer impact. So examples being cash balance of the buyers, their ability to raise debt, and the R&D productivity of their pipeline. External factors scored relatively low, and I think a particularly interesting thing of note, which we'll want to discuss today, is that the pricing potential scored the lowest of all of the factors that we discussed with these executives. The survey was fielded in the first half of this year, so it started in January. We ended in February. So it was right in the thick of all of the pricing discussions, and so. The other thing of note, the U.S. presidential election is not going to affect deal making too much. In terms of deal type, we've observed relatively little change in terms of the mix. There is some indication that both buyers and sellers are expecting slightly fewer partnerships, and buyers actually articulating fewer deals associated with traditional licensing partnerships than the sellers. And it'll be interesting to see if that evolves into greater acquisitions with earnouts, which we observed until the 2012 timeframe, or are there going to be more outright acquisitions? In terms of where buyers have articulated demand by phase of development and where sellers have outlined where they have assets available, buyers have for the 8 years we've been doing this, has always been this bifurcation of the demand. Phase 3 assets have been in high demand, and then preclinical. The buyers are either looking for assets that have shed as relatively most of the risk, or they're looking to purchase that risk because they want access to the technology in advance of losing it to potential competitors. And not surprisingly, the largest phase of development where there's an imbalance is phase 3, that their sellers there are relatively few assets, but the buyer demand is greatest. In terms of the demand and assets availability by therapeutic area, I apologize, this is a bit of a eye chart, but it's a feeder for the next slide. But if you look at it, I mean, not surprisingly, oncology both is the largest area in terms of buyer demand, as well as where sellers are activity in terms of licensing. The same data looked at a slightly different way by doing a bit of a demand index, trying to compare where the buyer demand is greatest relative to the seller asset availability. Oncology looks very different. It shows up on the right side where there's a buyer's market, relatively larger number of assets that are available relative to the buyer demand. And that's just given that there's been a flourishing of R&D activity, largely in the preclinical space currently within oncology. So there's a lot of assets available despite that very large demand on the buyer side. A key thing of note for this year, the antibiotic space showed up for the first time on the left side of this slide, indicating a higher demand by buyers, and it's largely attributed to, I think, a more favorable regulatory environment associated with antibiotics, and we're seeing a renaissance in this space. Buyers large companies who had exited this space historically have come back in a very meaningful way, and so it'll be interesting to see how that market evolves in the coming years. In terms of hot areas for licensing, not surprisingly, CAR-T and CRISPR technology scored very high in this. The other thing of note is many technology types associated with oncology score relatively high: cancer vaccine, antibody drug conjugates. Over the years, it'll be interesting to see if stem cells starts to move further to the left. The industry is fraught with risk. It's hard enough to get a product approved, and this is what I like to call our fear slide. We use it to hopefully drum up business for us, but deals are very hard to get. If you look at how buyers who've looked at opportunities and the cumulative conversion rate of getting from CDA to a term sheet to a completed transaction, it was 5% of the deals that were observed or looked at last year. It's pretty close to where it's been over the years. But to put that in context, across all therapeutic areas, getting an asset from phase 1 to approval is at about a 10% success rate. So you're half as likely to get a deal than it is you are likely to get your phase 1 approved. So in summary, some strategic implications. M&A momentum of 2015 is showing some signs of slowing. If you don't, perhaps the April and May may change that, we'll see. But buyers must be careful with their capital in this environment. Although asset prices have come down, they may not have come down as much as I think many buyers would like them to. And so they still need to be careful because those sellers still have options available to them. The financing environment has not shut down completely. It's still carrying a fair amount of momentum, and there's still options available to many sellers vis-a-vis regional deals. And both buyers and sellers should be aware of kind of where supply and demand as a way of identifying opportunities for each of them where there are imbalances to be aware of as they go into negotiations. So for more information, there's a lot more data available. I think there's cards that outline where the Dealmakers Intention white paper is located. There's a lot more data available, and by all means, please look to download it. So now we'll move over to the panel discussion. So what I'll ask is if each of the panelists can take a minute to introduce themselves, a bit of their background, their companies, and we'll go down, and maybe we'll start with you, Jim.
Right. Well, for today, I'm seated in Henry's seat, so I'm going to be Henry Grover today. I thought that'd be more interesting. So, like my new job over as the Chief Strategic Officer at AbbVie. So, yeah, so. Good luck with my portfolio. So, no, my name is Jim Healy. I'm a general partner at Sofinova. Have been there for 16 years. We're one of the largest biotech-only venture firms in the country.
So I'm Jim Healy. No, I'm Henry Gosebrook. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at AbbVie, which is a position where we have combined various disciplines focused on external innovation, so corporate strategy, alliance management, business development, and venture capital.
Christian Hordo, the head of business development at Juno Therapeutics, and we're looking to build the world's leading T-cell company, and I've been, I think, pretty prolific in the deal-making space in spite of being just 2.5 years old now. We're very interested in continuing that on the buy side, looking at licensing and bolt-on acquisitions, also looking at clinical collaborations. Prior to being at Juno, I had the privilege of working with Tom Zajanczek and learning from Tom Zajanczek at Genentech, where I spent 5 years.
I'm Ellen Lubman. I'm in the External Science and Innovation Group at at Activist. At Pfizer. At Allergan. And our group is responsible for sourcing and evaluating opportunities and working with our business development colleagues to transact on those.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Tom Zajanczek. I head up licensing for neuroscience, ophthalmology, metabolic disease, and our research tools and technology platform Deals. Unlike Ellen, actually, I've been at Genentech my whole career. Right after getting my PhD, I joined Genentech as a postdoc and was then hired on into a preclinical development role, then was a project team leader for a number of years, and then the last 10 years of my career at Genentech, I've been in business development.
Great. So for the first question, given the market environment, we're just put it in context, compared to last year's bio. The biotech index is about down 40%. The pharma index is down about 15% versus 2015, the bio in 2015, whereas the S&P 500 is flat. One can say, is it a market correction or not? But how do you think this environment is going to affect deal making, this volatility and sort of depressed assets versus 2015? And how are you thinking about your portfolios with respect to this market?
I can take this.
Sure.
So the interesting part is there's still a little bit of an overhang from the loftiness of 2015, and many companies that were able to get financing in 2014 and 2015 are still very, very bullish on their ability to raise capital and fundraise. And so they're not backing down off of valuations and upfronts as much as we would assume given the change. And with markets coming back a bit, I think that's giving them that baseline confidence that they will be able to raise capital if otherwise. I think sometimes you'll find little cracks and tweaks depending on especially if they're private companies, what their board has told them in terms of timing of an exit and what their, folks like Jim and other investors, what their needs are to move their portfolio forward and raise additional capital. So sometimes they'll get more pressure, but it has been pretty surprising on what the demands are for valuations. And by the way, if you guys don't ask questions, I'm going to cold call on various folks, so be prepared to come up with something in your head in case I cold call you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the overhang point, especially on the private company side. I think what I would expect to see, I think over the next 12 months or so, that I suspect will somewhat counteract that, is now that the IPO window is, let's say, less open than it was before. I think there is increasing pressure being put on those private companies in terms of looking at the next stage of financing, and that's having a bit of a blowback effect, as the crossover investors have left, going back to even Series B and in some cases Series A, where some of those investors in those companies are having to hold back more funds to take those companies through the next value inflection point. And I think when you look at the number of companies out there that have just 12 to 18 months worth of cash, I think as those cash reserves start to run dry, assuming the IPO window stays closed, I think we'll see a resurgence, in particular on the licensing front, from a capitalization need standpoint for a number of these companies.
Yeah, and I'd add to that we're now in June of 16. When you look at these charts, sort of more on a quarterly basis, the decline in valuations really happened more in the fall of last year. So we're somewhere between call it 9 months into 6 to 9 months maybe into a new valuation environment, a new capital environment, and if you look at this over many cycles. And even away from our space and other industries in general, deal activity is correlated to the overall market valuation level. So why people may think, hey, biotech is a lot cheaper now, shouldn't there be more deals because there's more opportunities for buyers to buy assets cheaply? Well, it turns out actually when you look at that over many cycles, what happens in those times is that the disconnect between where buyers and sellers are just is elevated, and it's harder to get transactions done. Whereas in markets with very active capital markets, active IPO markets, active stock market valuations, in general, that gap between buyers and sellers is narrower, and it's generally more conducive to getting transactions done. So again, I would say we're about 9 months into this new environment. Some of this is just psychology. I guess it takes 9 to 12 months for you to forget where things were a year ago. But if you asked a question a month after you hit your 52-week high, maybe you still remember that 52-week high a little bit more. So I think from a macro perspective, I would expect the second half to get a little bit more active. I do think that we're gonna stay at a relatively modest or frankly average level. I don't think we're going to snap back in the second half and all of a sudden we're going to see these sort of 2015 statistics. And there's many other external factors involved, whether it's the inversion transactions or again, obviously we'll talk about some of the sort of political overhang perhaps. But again, I think we'll see a steady pick up in the second half. I don't think we'll see a big sort of snap back to these kind of activity levels.
Right.
Jim, how are you advising your portfolio companies in this environment? Are you and going back to them and outlining what the market environment is now and trying to talk them down from some previous highs? and being a bit more sober, or are you, thinking about it's just a weathering the storm type of environment?
Yeah, so as the markets picked up in 2014 and 15, we were very active in terms of getting companies public. And so if I look at the entirety of our current portfolio of our active funds, it's a little under 50 companies, and 70% of those are public or have been acquired. And so we don't have a large pool of private companies. That's point number one. Among the public companies, all of them are funded to key milestones. And so share price notwithstanding, they have the capital to hit what we believe will be value-creating milestones, kind of definitive phase 3 data most typically. So then for the private companies, I'd say we have asked them to focus a bit more, but the syndicates that we brought together for most of those private deals were intentionally a little bit larger than they typically would have been, just to make sure they have the cash to weather the storm.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about the capital market, but what are the other drivers, big story elements that are going to drive the market one way or the other, drive the deal-making environment one way or the other? There's been a lot of talk of price and its long-term effect on deal-making. Our study, for whatever reason, shows it to be a relatively low factor with respect to deal-making. That might be a very short-term view. So would love to hear, what does the panel think about, other drivers? Maybe it's price, but any other major drivers of deal making that needs to be factored in?
I have a couple thoughts. So first is that most large pharma companies are cash rich and pipeline poor and have been for some time. And so the only real way for them to fill the voids in their commercial product portfolios is largely through acquisitions. And so I think that will continue. Second point is that there is now a very diverse array of buyers. If you look at the absolute number of companies that have over a $2 billion market cap, it's roughly 50 companies, which is up by about a factor of 5 compared to 4 or 5 years ago. So there's a larger number of potential buyers that can pay $500,000 for a company. And so I think that there's an absolute, there's a numbers game there. Second is that there's a diversity aspect among the current buyer universe that we haven't seen in the past. If I look at our last 3 acquisitions, one was bought by a traditional buyer, that was AstraZeneca buying ZS Pharma. We had a company in Europe, Pregum Therapeutics, that was bought by a European spec pharma, so Gideon Richter. So somewhat atypical, at least from my almost 20 years of experience. And third, we had an otherwise generics-oriented company, Intiva, buy Labris from us for up to $825 million. So there's both a larger number of buyers and much more diversity among them compared to where the industry was 5 to 10 years ago.
So maybe I could take a stab at that. I would first agree with Jim that there seems to be this expansion of the industry and kind of the ecosystem with small, medium, and large companies, and so more buyers. But I also like to think about really us being in this golden age of genomics as new opportunities and technologies are just opening up. There are new targets available. The advances that are going on in cancer immunotherapy right now, people thinking about digital health and being able to pull all this data together. It just feels like I would say the molecular biology, the new targets, the biomarkers coming together with digital health, it's going to be this synergy of opportunity that I think is really going to kind of continue to make our industry somewhat frothy and drive deal making.
I'll echo what Tom is saying, but also more toward neuroscience. We are really seeing finally groundbreaking paths forward in neurological and neurodegenerative disorders where really targeted therapies are coming together and coalescing with biomarkers that will enable more expeditious and more clear paths toward definitive outcomes in earlier stage studies, which has obviously, the neuroscience community has suffered for the last 15 years on the sort of the pain to get products forward and into patients and so on. So hopefully, I mean, we're just seeing so much in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease that is really defines a patient population, to your point about, finally genomics and pharmacogenomics coming into fruition, where you can really define a patient population and target that patient population and get an answer in them sooner than later. And there is opportunity in the larger population, but if you have proof of principle in that smaller group, I think that's critical. I will say, though, the flip side is, so, yesterday I heard a panel where one of Juno's investors, and obviously Juno and some of the other CAR-T and CRISPR and otherwise companies have really paved the path into that kind of groundbreaking platform. The issue is, because of that, there's all these startups behind it, and nobody really knows now where those are going to be differentiated. And so I think some of those companies, while they're following paths laid by other successful companies, probably also in successful scientifically and because of the markets, they're now going to be hitting a bit of a wall in terms of getting their own financing and funding, and they don't understand why. It's IO, it's the hottest thing, right? Well, it's kind of moving away from that now.
Yeah, maybe I'll take that point around CAR-T. I think there are some interesting dynamics in this space where, we saw the proliferation of, I think, a few early players carry it forward, get access to some core intellectual property and make the pretty substantive investments that are required to actually bring a cell therapy to market. And in more recent years, we've now seen a lot of startups. I mean, it's every other day you see a startup, and most of these companies have what I would call a component that they hope will differentiate the ultimate final product, which in a CAR-T, unlike a traditional small molecule or antibody, I mean, these are multifaceted products that have a lot of elements that ultimately drive safety and efficacy. And so it is a difficult argument to make that the one piece of it will ultimately be the single piece that differentiates. And that, combined with the fact that the investment required to actually bring these things forward at this stage is monstrous, that really that's been driving actually a lot of the deal making on our end, because these companies are increasingly, I think, coming to the established players to partner so that we can work together to actually integrate some of those technologies into our products. And there was a slide up there about hot areas, and I think the question was, will they continue? I would expect it to continue for that reason, because these companies on the smaller side absolutely need more established players to do that. And the other, I think, factor we're seeing in the CAR-T space is that my perception is a lot of the larger pharmaceutical companies made the decision to, mainly with the exception of Novartis, I would say, made the decision to interrogate the biology through CD3-directed bispecific antibodies or through allogeneic CAR-T approaches, which are modalities that are obviously more within their sphere of comfort. But as the data emerges around the autologous CAR-T approaches, we may see, I think, increasing interest for those players to have a deeper stake in the autologous game, which I think would then drive deal making from the top down as well in this space.
So I wanted to come back to a comment that Jim made, which is, I think, yes, the pool of companies looking for transactions, perhaps has increased. You've got, the traditional pharma, the biotech, some of the companies that have gone public the last 4 or 5 years that were often, had a story of, 1 or 2 key assets and are now looking to build to those platforms. But I think the other part of this is that for many of the pharmaceutical companies, ourselves included, we are narrowing down on therapeutic areas, and we're all trying to build more significant leadership positions in a narrow set of opportunities. So for AbbVie, as an example, immunology, oncology, neurology, HCV, and so what that does is a couple things. I think one, for any given opportunity, you're not going to have 10 pharmas knocking on your door in general, because again, it may only fit the strategy of a narrow set of pharma companies, and again, perhaps that void is filled by by other parties. To Jim's point. But I think the other thing is that we're sort of seeing a pretty significant increase in partnering opportunities where if you have an interesting immunology asset, well, we happen to know a little bit about commercializing, immunology assets or developing immunology assets. And at the end of the day, partnerships are based on what can somebody like us add to, a preclinical company, a phase 1 company. How can we work together to accelerate a timeline, broaden a development program, get a new therapy on the market. And so I think that focus on leadership opportunities, while again it may narrow the parties, will open opportunities for people like us where we'll have a differentiated position in helping companies get to where they want to get to, and I think that's an important part of these overall trends.
I'd like to build on the discussion around the therapeutic area, and we had the demand index that is meant to be more provocative than necessarily data-driven. But would like to talk about what, and I know that some of you have specific focuses, and so maybe take off that hat for a bit and say, what therapeutic areas do you observe kind of becoming more in demand? Where is growth coming? I mean, if we were to fast forward 10 years, are we going to have the discussion around the same therapeutic areas at this panel that we're having now, or how is that going to change?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this. We just looked at that. Look, any statistics you look at would say that oncology has dominated deal activity, and really interestingly in lots of phases. So whether you look at M&A or you look at early stage, even preclinical deal activity. And depending on some of the things you could look at, you could almost say that that's been double the next therapeutic area. I think to Ellen's point, I actually would say that CNS is probably an area that's going to show a fair bit of growth going forward. Again, to her point, we're finally developing a set of tools that enable some new candidates that perhaps weren't feasible 4 or 5 years ago, and so I think that's going to be a pretty interesting area going forward. I mean, you had the anti-infective stat up there. I think again, while a lot of pharmas have sort of gotten out of that, and it's a pretty narrow universe, there again is I think an area where there's new innovation that in some cases is replacing some of these old products that have been around for 30 years, and so I think those would be 2 areas I would highlight as maybe a bigger increase going forward.
Yeah, I could comment on that as well. I think that cancer obviously has been a hot area over the last decade or so, and now kind of just got reinvigorated with some progress and new discoveries in terms of cancer immunotherapy. But I was intrigued by your slide, and you were showing kind of, I think, what were hot emerging areas as CNS and neurodegeneration. I think all of those top 3 was anti-infective, CNS, and I believe pain was one of them. Okay. These are major unmet medical needs in society today that really have not had, I think, the focus that cancer and oncology therapeutics development has had over the last decade. And it's certainly my hope that, while we should and can continue to make progress in oncology, that some of our attention is turned towards some of these devastating diseases like Alzheimer's disease. And clearly, Genentech and others on this stage companies are making attempts there. The anti-infectives, I was just listening on NPR the other day. Apparently, there was a woman here in the United States that's gone through the entire course of all antibiotic therapies, and they have nothing left to treat her with. And so that was sort of the worry of everyone when we get to the point where we've used our whole sort of arsenal of antibiotics, and then what, right? So there is a major unmet medical need for new antibiotics to treat antibiotic-resistant bugs. And then lastly, I think it is this whole area of pain and trying to think of new drugs that are not non-opiate related, so that we don't have to deal with the abuse and addiction that we're seeing in our society today. those are three, I think, major unmet medical needs and will be hot emerging areas for us.
So I will echo neuroscience, some of the other ones. Where there's also a major need and not a lot of innovation is in women's health and IVF. So there is a lot of need there. There's a few early stage companies that have kind of like the CAR T issues. They solve one thing, but you sort of have a whole treatment paradigm that needs to be solved and altered. So there's major needs there. Definitely in the non-opiate pain space, but also the issue, also I'll bring in the really annoying big pharma aspect, which is, to your point of treating that one patient in this area who had gone through everything else, how many people or patients will there be out there that need that? And is that the kind of need that can drive enough of a commercial impact to have a pharma or a biotech or a VC invest in these companies and get them going all the way to that point when you'll be treating, at the end of the day, a very small patient population, but it's not an orphan disease. So you're not going to get some of the regulatory and financial benefits to pay back your investment there. So that's definitely kind of one of the things we think about vis-a-vis also the pricing you brought up as not as big of an impact. That's true, but then when you're going to get to these very kind of end of the road, whether it's in cancer treatment or anti-infectives, are the populations there and the pricing there to support reimbursement for those areas? And that's going to be a challenge for investment into those areas.
Okay. And Jim, in terms of the next wave of companies you're thinking about investing in, how do you, is it a therapeutic area? Are you looking at technology types? And maybe it's opportunistic, but how are you thinking about this sort of next wave of portfolio companies that you've yet to invest in?
Yeah, we think of it from a top-down portfolio construction, kind of risk management perspective within a portfolio. So we like to have a solid core foundation of clinical stage opportunities. We will find some cutting-edge science opportunities, and then don't like to have too much of the portfolio, usually more than 10% within a single indication, because if the FDA decides to change guidance, it's okay to have 10% of your portfolio at risk. It's not okay to have 30% of your portfolio. So specifically, the three core disease areas and then three specialty areas that we focus on, we've already spoken about a few of those. So one would be in infectious diseases. We like that because preclinical efficacy tends to be highly indicative of clinical efficacy, so long as you have a safe dose or the right dose and the drug is safe. We like rare orphan genetic diseases for many reasons. And then oncology continues to be a core theme for us. And then within the specialty markets, we've had a lot of our products end up in the hands of Allergan. So we've done a lot of ophthalmology, dermatology, and women's health, and continue to believe that those are areas where there's high unmet medical need and an ability to either commercialize a product with a sales force of 100 or less reps or sell it at a good price to Ellen and her colleagues. So.
Jim, maybe I'll just touch on that oncology point. I mean, even taking off my Juno hat, if the question is what area do we think we'll see the most deal making going forward, I think unquestionably it will continue to be oncology. We have made incredible advances over the last half decade, even to the point where the word cure can now start to enter our vocabulary, which is something that genuinely gives me goosebumps that you can even say that. But at the same time, we are still not at the point where we've actually realized that mission. And there's still a long way to go in spite of all the progress we've seen on the immuno-oncology side. And so because, one, we've made such strong advancements and the underlying science, I think, is enabling these advancements to occur, but two, because we still have such a ways to go, it's hard to see the investments and the partnerships in the oncology arena decreasing at this juncture.
And it's a growing market. Many tumors are age-related, and if you look at the aging of the baby boomers as a class, it's estimated that most solid tumors will see an increase of 20 to 50% relative to the prevalence or incidence today. So.
So actually just, and we're not in oncology, but what I think is where there is a need, since the question was also about where are there needs, is understanding and figuring out how to not stop metastasis, but prevent it. I don't know, I think there's various hypotheses out there on seeding and what are the attributes of a cancer cell before it mets. And that's, if you can work on that, please, figure that out, that would be great.
Jim would invest in that, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
As long as it's at the right price.
Exactly.
And I think, it's one of the really interesting things that I find about the investment in oncology is that that understanding sort of in oncology is starting to get applied to other areas, sort of molecular understanding. It's the better we're able to kind of address and look at how to treat oncology, it's going to benefit other therapeutic areas down the road, and that's a very exciting future as well.
Any other questions?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I was just going to remind people that there's mics.
We can hear you.
There we go. So before I get cold called on, thought I'd ask a question.
Smart.
In the past, the balance of time pressure has always been on the sellers. And Ellen's lamenting that the sellers aren't caving as much as you think we should at this point. And there's a very rational explanation from James that the VCs have been loading up sellers quite a bit more in the past. They're not feeling the time pressure, and yet I see changing titles and a lot of turmoil in the mid-tier companies and changing management at the larger pharma. So do you think the balance of time pressure has shifted now?
So is the question that as time, couldn't hear you well.
Oh, sorry. I said, do you think the balance of time pressure on the need to do a deal has shifted from the sellers to the buyers, since the sellers now have more money in their pockets and the buyers are facing change every quarter?
For us, for sure. Yeah. We also, our whole model is what we call open science. All of our innovation is derived externally through partners. The way we structure most of our deals, we need a partner who can drive things as far through proof of concept, into proof of concept, toward proof of concept. We will support it, but we don't have the people and manpower to move those things forward, whereas we have the cash to hope that you can. So that's an approach we take.
And I'd like to just contrast, that's very different than my world, where we're getting approached by companies that in many cases have plenty of money, right? They have sitting on a lot of cash. But there's other reasons for partnering, and that's experience and kind of track record, and they can take the programs only so far, and then are looking to companies like Genentech to help them through, whether it be the valley of death or an early clinical development, and thinking about how best to maximize the value of their opportunity. So it's not always that we're being approached or we're entering into collaborations just because they're seeking financing.
Yeah, I would follow up on that conversation. Having been on the other side of that table, when we did our deal with Celgene last year, I think a lot of people looked at the $1 billion upfront number and said, well, wow, that must have been why they did it. It was to get more capital. And certainly that was one of the key considerations. But I can tell you, the major driver of the decision to do that deal was around capabilities. In particular, the active decision we made internally that we wanted to focus our efforts on generating a regenerative R&D pipeline and doing U.S. commercialization. And that for us, trying to do three things, trying to do those two things and commercialize ex-U.S. would have meant that likely we would have done three mediocre things instead of two things in a great fashion. And so we sought out a partner explicitly to help with that third so that we could focus on our core competencies.
Hello, my name is Veena Krishnappa. I'm from the Scripps Research Institute. So it looks like this is the right timing to make deals in IO and gene therapy. So my question is, where do you think the science related to cell therapy is? And would we, in the near future, see a wave of regenerative medicine or cell therapy?
Neil, could you repeat the question?
I could not understand.
Yeah, so I think the question is, where do you think, so immuno-oncology and gene therapy have kind of flourished. Where do you see cell therapy, regenerative medicine in terms of deal making?
Well, because it's a little bit of a softball up to me, so I'll
Who's the cell therapy guy in the panel?
Where do you think it goes?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as I articulated earlier, you know, I think in both of those spaces, really, those dynamics I described that I think Ellen introduced, where when you have established players that are starting to emerge, and I think this is very true in CRISPR just as much as it's true with CAR-Ts, that it does create difficult barriers to entry for smaller players to differentiate themselves. And that's not to say that there's not really high quality science that could lead to those products ultimately being differentiated. It's more that I think it's an area that's really ripe for partnering, because those smaller, newer companies in those arenas are almost by definition going to have to partner with the more established players from an investment and from an intellectual property standpoint. So I definitely see, in particular as the science continues to evolve, deal making actually increasing greatly in both of those spaces.
Yeah. For me, like in 1980s or 90s, gene therapy was at the wrong spot to be like a therapy. Now the science has advanced so much that like investors feel confident to venture into it, but I'm not sure what's your perspective on, like, is the science right for anyone to venture into making a deal, or is it like a high risk area?
So I'm gonna answer you a different way, which is it totally just depends on specifically what science, what platform, what you're talking about, and what data has been derived. Throwing theses out there on what's good and bad and so on is sort of irrelevant. I mean, gosh, if I hear about one more microbiome thing, I might myself get C. diff. But the point is, what is it targeting? What data do you have to support that it will work in XYZ space? And then that's what's interesting and relevant, at least to us as a partner. We need to see, where is this going? How do we build it, develop it, manufacture it, get it reimbursed, sell it, to what doctors, to what patients, to what advocacy groups? It needs to have a clear picture, not just a thesis.
So like the clear picture hasn't evolved yet for the area, kind of.
Sorry?
There's no clear picture that has evolved for the area in general yet.
I think it just depends on specifically which science, which cell type, which application, which disruptive technology you're specifically referring to, and where it has advanced.
Okay. Thank you.
So just to build on that theme a little bit, with regard to, so you mentioned the hot technologies on one of your earlier slides, and in particular CRISPR technology. You know, this is an area where there remain significant technical hurdles to getting it yet for delivery into humans, yet the current enthusiasm around it is quite significant. And what do you think the tolerance level or the patience level of the buyers is going to be for whatever that time is that it takes to actually prove that it can be done in humans and it will be of a tangible benefit to patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I'd like to be able to say is that ultimately that the quality of the science and the clinical data in all cases will uniformly attract buyers. But I think what we've seen in practice, in particular in our space, is, as you point out, the other considerations around manufacturability, commercialization, the regulatory landscape, those absolutely play into the minds of, I think, my perception would be the major pharmaceutical companies. And that actually creates a niche, I think, for smaller companies to emerge and basically bear that risk. And there's certainly been examples where I think the science and the clinical efficacy hasn't quite been there, and those problems haven't been solved adequately. I think of Dendreon, I think, as a reasonable example of that. But, you know, at least in our space, we feel that the efficacy levels we're seeing clinically are robust enough, and the investments in manufacturing were made early enough that fundamentally those problems are all solvable problems. And I think slowly but surely the industry's coming around to that. But I think the larger you are and the more established of a presence you have doing things a certain way, the more daunting I think those non-scientific challenges become. And so again, I think as we see the emergence of these new modalities, that does create a great opportunity, I think, for small biotechs to flourish.
Yeah, I mean, you see the modality push for, let's call it a small company. I mean, if you think back all the way to monoclonals and Genentech as a small company decades ago, before there was an earnest interest in the more traditional, larger players. And even now within gene therapy, it is with their larger companies have kind of waited to see the technology evolve until the innovator really gets it to a point, and then you'll probably see a greater level of activity. And I think you'll see a similar cycle for other regenerative medicines. It's just going to be pushed by that innovator company until it gets to a point where it's going to be of sufficient interest for the larger companies.
Well, maybe as the founder of a company that's dedicated to delivery of oligonucleotides, I could add a perspective on the conversation. And I agree that there's tremendous opportunity with CRISPR, mRNA, siRNA. The challenge, of course, is delivery. But one thing that I find really interesting is that a company like a Moderna, for example, can gain such mind share in mRNA and basically it's kind of a land grab, but then recognizes, hey, we need delivery technologies, we need other aspects of our platform that we can't, do ourselves. And they'll look to companies like ours and try to kind of bundle in our platform and then go on and sell to a pharma company and add that to their arsenal. But we in turn will be looking for the direct connection with pharma, and I think how we handle the rights, the intellectual property, will be worked out. But ultimately, there's going to have to be multiple parties coming together to make these technologies work. I guess, Jim, from an investor side, how much interest is there in a platform, technology that enables one of these, next generation technologies, but maybe is not the complete picture, but a significant part of it, for example, delivery?
Yeah, there's no question that the technology platforms and product enabling technologies are important. As a firm, we tend to be very focused on patient benefit and clinical need that's addressable within a very short time frame. So we tend to be much more product oriented than we are platform oriented. The times when we invested in platforms, it's because those platforms had already generated clinical candidates that were often first product was in the clinic. So broadly speaking, I think there's a need for us as investors or as a firm. We're very focused on getting things into a clinic, trials being successful, and transacting the company soon after our financing. So
I can also, just from a pharma standpoint, I think for us, everybody's so busy and so strapped that as a small biotech, we hope that you come to us with something that is, you can paint a picture as much as you can on, is this a protein, is this a peptide, is it, going into SAD, MAD studies with an IV, but with intention to formulate into a sub-Q. And we almost hope that that partner figures out the delivery, the optimal delivery method and the optimal delivery strategy when they come to us, because it's harder for us to take the time to cobble together all the aspects that we need to evaluate a deal and add that on top of it. Plus, the other thing is generally we've built up such delivery capabilities over the years. We have Botox, and people say, well, what if you had a longer duration Botox? Well, the FDA would kill us. We have ophthalmic therapeutics that are back of the eye, front of the eye, and so on, and we have dermatology. And my point is we have figured out in so many ways to deliver these things that there might be kind of niches where we need things, but we won't really know until we're kind of in the process to manufacture that program already, which is probably going to be too late for a drug delivery company focused only on drug delivery to enter. So I don't know if
I could make a comment and just say that as it relates to ocular drug delivery, I think there is really a major need for good long-acting delivery technologies that can deliver either large or small molecules to the back of the eye. We have seen over the last 5 years or so how impactful biotech has been on curing major diseases like age-related macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. But patients and physicians alike are demanding for therapies that can have a decreased dosing frequency. So we're out of the once a month injection into the eye and more into a once every 6 months. So any advances in the ocular drug delivery space for back of the eye diseases, I think, would be welcomed.
So I think everyone's kind of brought up the increased number of small mid-cap biotechs, kind of a continued disconnect between what they believe their value is and what buyers believe their value is. And then right now what we have playing out kind of in the public eye is the Sanofi pursuit of medivation. Do you think we're going to kind of see an increase of these kind of more forced type style of acquisitions due to this disconnect, or do you think this is kind of a one-off and kind of will continue to have what seems to be more agreeable partnerships and acquisitions that we've more historically had?
I think there's going to continue to be a very small, tiny portion of those deals that are unsolicited, and it's very special situations that that might drive that. I mean, look, if you look at overall deals, I mean, first of all, 75 to 80% are partnership broadly defined, and M&A as a number of deals matter, much smaller, maybe 15 to 20% max. And again, even within that slice, it's always about finding the right opportunity for incremental value, again, through speed, capability, whatever it might be. And there's going to be just a very, very small set of circumstances where it's worth doing what Sanofi is doing now, and we'll see where that plays out. But I don't think you'll see a bunch of unsolicited deals. Just again to my earlier point, because biotech is down 40% or whatever it is, and pharma says, okay, if you're not willing to come to the table, I'll convince you to come to the table. I think we're going to see a very, very tiny portion only.
Yeah, and there's definitely examples on the other side of it as well. And I think the overhang issue is more acute on the private side. I mean, if you look at a deal like Pfizer-Anacor, that was a deal that was substantively below the 52-week high, was still at a premium to the trading stock price. And so, I think I would agree that that's probably the exception as opposed to the rule.
Syed Kazmi from Amgen. I would like to explore a bit further the impact of pricing and access on valuation gap in deal making these days. I mean, compared to what we used to do before, now in addition to doing the primary research with KOLs, we are talking to payers all the time, even in early stage of deal making. We are being asked questions from our commercial colleagues, and I'm sure others have probably experienced the same, annual price increases, the access haircut, even in oncology, and that results in significant valuation gap. Like right now, there are a lot of pharma-to-pharma deals are going on in oncology, checkpoint inhibitors combined with other targeted therapies. And there, we have done some, and there also the pricing issue comes up. So how the panel, in your deal-making experience, how are you dealing with this valuation gap? Because notwithstanding the survey result that came out of inVentiv, it'll be interesting to peel the onion there and see what's going on. But I think we're seeing the pricing and access becoming a much bigger factor in deal making across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I can start on that. I think we certainly spend a lot of time. I'm sure that my colleagues on the panel as well, thinking through the ultimate, commercial execution and commercial opportunity. And I think we, and I'm sure others, are just getting more sophisticated about asking all those questions, much, much earlier. So the times where you could just develop, some interesting drug and you would sort of automatically assume that, it was going to, be a significant product. Again, I'm trying to sort of simplify it. Those times are long, long gone. And I think what we see with a lot of discussions with earlier stage companies is that they just haven't had the resources or the opportunities really to think through the commercialization in the right way. And again, we think partnerships with people like us can really help, so that through development you can anticipate those things. And at the end of the day, if you're really focused on true breakthrough innovation, which is what we are, and you think through the development the right way, so that hopefully what you're producing on the other side of the development timeline is that clearly differentiated, clearly innovative product, pricing will be fine. But when you're just doing lots of shortcuts and you think at the end of the day you're going to have this really valuable product, that's not a winning strategy.
Yeah, I would absolutely second what Henry said. I think the key is that if you really have transformative therapies that are highly differentiated, they can command premium pricing, where you can show that there is significant efficacy, benefit, or even safety. Convenience plays or any incremental therapy are not going to be able to command that kind of premium pricing. I think pricing pressures are real. They're here today. We've seen it in Europe for some number of years now. We're now seeing it in Asia, and I would submit that it's really a bipartisan issue here in the United States. Regardless of who is our next president, we're going to be facing significant pricing pressures here in the United States.
Yeah, I might take a bit of a different angle on the question. I know the politics is in the title of our panel, so I'll throw that into the mix, as you alluded to. And the question you're asking, I think, is a broad question about that pertains really to the health of our sector. And I do worry that the combination of the pricing debate and this political climate creates some challenges. I mean, if you look at the public discourse around our industry, the life-saving mission of our industry has been transformed into, as a result of hyperbole, into really a source of public scrutiny. And it's always sort of been in the background, but I think it's especially acute in this election cycle. And speaking as we all are, as folks within the industry, I don't know that there's any other industry out there where there is a greater disconnect between the motivations of the people and the perception of the industry, of the people in the industry, versus the external perception. If you go to Juno or Genentech, or likely the vast majority of the companies represented in this room, and you sit in on a patient speaking to those at the companies about the therapeutics they're on, you will see goosebumps, you will see tears, you will feel raw emotion. And somewhere that story is getting lost. And I worry that if we as an industry don't do more to own that message, that we leave it in the hands of the politicians and, dare I say, the Scarellis of the world to drive that message for us. And I do think that is a threat to the longer term health of our industry.
I'd say the PR problem that we have is quite significant. I mean, I saw a article in January that talks about vilified industries, and pharmaceuticals was second to tobacco, but slightly better than oil and gas. I mean, it's just, given what we do, it's a tremendous PR issue.
So it's a collective responsibility that if we all do not proactively step up and take a seat at the table, we're going to be on the menu. We are on the menu now. We'll stay on the menu. And so I think part of the discourse is that, if you look across the healthcare ecosystem, that it's a very large part of our economy here in the U.S., representing about 18% of the GDP. Pharmaceuticals represents a very small slice of that, 10, 12%, depending upon how you define pharma. Physician services is probably twice that, at 20 to 25%. Hospital services, 3 times that. And from my perspective, the baddest actor is the insurance company. If you look last year across all drugs, the net price increase, not gross, gross is irrelevant, we negotiate beyond that. So the net price increase, I believe, was between 2.3 and 2.5% for pharmaceuticals. Look at insurance premiums, mid-teens, 13 to 15%. And they're not sharing any of that wealth within the ecosystem, either with hospitals or with physicians, certainly not with the pharmaceutical industry. And so I think there needs to be a much more holistic discussion here. It talks about the overall environment.
And transparency about rates like that, because nobody talks about that.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jim. I think that we do admittedly have a real issue here with the cost of healthcare. But I think, as you point out, that sometimes the pharmaceutical industry takes most of the brunt of the negative sentiment toward that, and I don't know that it's really justified. But I do like your point about, I think we all need to work together to figure out how we can develop drugs more efficiently, more cost effectively, and do our part. But we can only do our part. We have to call on our colleagues and take a much more holistic, view and do our share at addressing these rising healthcare costs, because it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. I think Bio as an organization, I was in a session, like a brainstorming session with Jim Greenwood, and they're trying, it's almost falling upon Bio, less so pharma, but Bio, to get the message out there about what are we really doing? We're hopefully curing cancer, and we're certainly curing Hep C, and we're getting close to, AIDS is no longer a, death sentence. I mean, we have truly changed the face of medicine, especially over the last, 15 years, dramatically. And that message is not being conveyed. And I think Bio is trying at least to create much more initiatives and partnerships with pharmaceutical companies to get those messages out there more. So for any of you out there who have an interest, reach out to your Bio person and see what you can do to, get the message out there to your constituents, to your friends, to your whatever.
That's great. There's a terrific talk that Jim Greenwood put together that talks about drug pricing, the overall value chain, and where we sit, and all of the constituents. I believe it's available on the web. If not, I know he has offered to make it freely available to anyone, and I think it's one of the best written articles that I've read. There's also a campaign ad. Pfizer has their own, Pharma's working on one. Bio has one that's called Time is Precious. You can find it on YouTube. And I think it really speaks to the impact that we can have at a personal level for patients and the time that we buy them in their life, and the fact that life is precious. And so that is what motivates most of us in the industry, and yet we're vilified, in kind of a different species, when it comes to how we're perceived on the outside. So I advise kind of trying to find Jim's talk, and then also looking up the Time is Precious ad.
And I think the bio, the pharma, getting the message out, that's important, but I also think to some extent it's got to be bottoms up as well, that there's an inherent skepticism in the public's eye whenever that message is coming from an industry player or a trade organization. And I think there is a role to play for everybody in the industry to carry that message when you're at an event and somebody says something about drug pricing and gouging and why we're doing what we're doing, to step out and explain why you really are doing it. Because I think stories are really powerful, and it's not sort of the easy way to approach it. But I do think, and I take it on myself as well, we all could probably do a better job of being individual ambassadors, explaining why we're doing what we're doing.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Sheila McHale, and I've started several AAV gene therapy companies over the last 15 years. My most current company, Bamboo Therapeutics, is advancing a treatment for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy into the clinic the first half of next year. My question is, over the last 15 years, we've experienced in the AAV area a lot of advances, but also setbacks, and I think that's typical of new evolving technologies. One of my concerns in structuring partnerships, and I'm looking for some advice on how to properly structure a partnership, is how do you make sure that your technology is given multiple chances to advance? For example, In gene therapy, a lot of times the initial clinical trials failed because either the dose wasn't right, maybe self-complementary added on to a particular serotype increased the efficacy of the vector such that there was lower likelihood of success. It wasn't that the technology itself or the approach was wrong, it's just that the animal models are not always predictive. Going into the clinic for Duchenne, we've been approached by a lot of partners, but my company is also financed by parents who have children with the disease, and so they want to make sure that if we go in the first time and the dose is maybe a little bit lower than it should be, or some minor tweaking needs to occur, that we structure a partnership with a pharmaceutical company where it's not just a one-shot on goal. And so I'm looking for, is there any advice that you all can give for advancing, evolving technologies where there's still some uncertainty, some learning that we will only know once we go into the clinic, and how do you properly structure a deal so that the technology has the best shot of being successful?
I mean, it's hard to comment on sort of very specific situations, but I would say, from our perspective, in many of these partnering discussions, getting the actual deal terms done is a lot easier than really figuring out with your partner what the development plan is, how to best work together, where we can add value. And I think that's really the core of it. If there isn't a good alignment between us and our partner on how to do that, that's not the basis of a good partnership. Even if if the economic part, if there might be some alignment on that. So again, it's hard to comment on your specific situation, but I just would say look for a partner that's bought into that strategy. And unless you have that, I wouldn't do the partnership for economic reasons. I would make sure you have alignment on the plan and how to best make sure these treatments, if they work, get to patients.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that question is pick the right partner. I think deal structure in scenarios like that is a safeguard and is a last resort, but I would absolutely prioritize finding a partner who's committed to your space and as you mentioned, sees eye to eye with how you're thinking about developing it, in particular if you have founders who have certain needs and priorities. So take your time and really be thoughtful about who the partner is you choose, and it may not be the company offering the most money.
Yeah, and a really successful deal of that sort, you pretty much, you don't want to have to look at the term sheet once you've signed it, right? Because it's probably not going to be relevant for where the science is going to take you. It might take you sideways, and so things like the finding a champion within the company and the chemistry that you have as companies with each other are going to be more important in building that partnership and moving that technology forward. Okay. Well, I want to thank the panelists for this discussion. It's been
thank the audience
for
all the questions.
And yes,
Thank you.
Ellen didn't have to choose anyone.
No cold calling.
Baby, just how you feel.